Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show from a blustery Belfast, and in particular to the Stormont estate, where the governance of Northern Ireland has taken place for the last 90 years. In the impressive parliamentary buildings behind me, Lord Craigavon, the first Prime Minister of Northern Ireland, once declared it a Protestant Parliament for a Protestant state. But other changes in the social and economic undergrowth of this province, which are going to bring about a very different outcome.
And welcome to Tower Gardens outside the Palace of Westminster, where the House of Commons dramatically voted this week to seize control of the Brexit process from the hapless Prime Minister. There have been some indications of a possible shift towards Theresa May's now twice defeated backstop deal. One or two toffs at the top of the Brexiteer European Reform Group have raised the white flag, but there is still no surrender from the hard men and women of Ulster. This is how the Democratic Unionists and a Tory backbencher put the Prime Minister's deal to the sword in the chamber.
Her statement will represent the most shameful surrender by a British leader since Singapore in 1942.
When are you going to stop using Northern Ireland as an excuse, and do you realise that the importance of this agreement to delivering Brexit and also to the unity of the United Kingdom is such that we will not be used in any scare tactics to push this through?
What I have genuinely been trying to achieve through everything that I have been doing is ensuring that we respect the wishes of the people of Northern Ireland and we respect Northern Ireland's position within the United Kingdom. The situation in relation to the European Union's proposal is that it's been very clear about European Union laws and the necessity of those EU laws being applied.
However, if the Prime Minister's deal looks like a dead duck, will the MPs do any better? I'm joined by senior SNP MP Angus Brendan McNeill. Welcome to the show, Angus.
Thank you.
Now, will this parliamentary process bring any order at all to the current chaos?
Well, I think we're mid-chaos, or perhaps we're at the beginning of the chaos. This is something that should have happened about two and a half years ago. The Prime Minister made a deal and had no idea how it would be reacted, what the reaction would be in Parliament. Parliament said no, this is some form of a sticking plaster to try and get the good ship UK away from the icebergs.
And what is your own preferred route forward for the future?
Well, I think the best way is to revoke this. People didn't vote to make themselves poorer, and we can see that by what was written on the side of a bus. They thought they were getting £350 million extra a week. People were misled badly by the whole Brexit argument in the beginning. I think revoke it, forget it, and go back to what we were doing. And
given the MPs have effectively taken over and become the government this week, Angus, have you been enjoying your new role?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think this should have happened a long time ago. Clearly, we're doing a little bit better under Prime Minister Oliver Letwin than we were under Prime Minister Theresa May. But the reality is MPs had to do this because the government were abdicating their responsibility to consult properly. So now, what should have happened 2.5 years ago will be happening.
Some have said that the SNP is campaigning rather more vigorously for a second Brexit vote or people's vote than they are actually for a second independence referendum vote. Is that true?
Well, I can see why people would say that with the attention all on Brexit at the moment. Perhaps the way I'd like to put it is the SNP have perhaps pressed pause a little bit when it comes to independence and are pushing the revocation or people's vote a little bit more, and the emphasis has been on that. But I think it's time for the SNP to pivot away from that. The SNP have done their best to bring order to the chaos. But, you know, if people frankly don't accept order and want to continue with chaos, well, it's time for Scotland to get out and to be in the safety that we see Ireland in or Denmark in or whatever, and be an independent country.
Angus Brendan McNeill, thank you very much indeed. The rock on which the Prime Minister's plan has perished is the Irish backstop. As this week's parliamentary exchanges show, she has totally miscalculated the vehemence of the Democratic Unionist opposition to any proposal which risks placing Northern Ireland out of total alignment with the rest of the UK. Thus, in parliamentary terms at Westminster, the DUP have never been more influential or more successful. However, even as they dominate the Commons, Alex has been finding out that the DUP's uncompromising approach is stirring some disquiet back home in Northern Ireland. In this show we ask, stands Ulster where it did?
Alistair MacDonald, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
And Alec, you're very welcome to Stormont and to Northern Ireland.
Now, Alistair, you've been a practitioner in the hurly-burly of Northern Irish politics since 1970, when as a very young man you stood against the Reverend Ian Paisley. What changes have taken place in the background, in the undergrowth of that political scene over that period of time?
Over that period of time, Northern Ireland has been transformed. We came from a relatively primitive society where there was one party absolutely dominating politics, and 50% of the population had little or no say. In fact, maybe 60–70% of the population had little or no say.
That's not just the Catholic community.
That's right. That's right.
That's the Catholic community and what
The Protestant working class were all kept down. There was what we described as big house unionism in the 60s and 70s, and that's why the civil rights movement broke out, demanding fair play for everybody.
In these days, when the Free State was established in the south and the Stormont Parliament in the north, the northern economy was the powerhouse of the Irish economy and a very significant economy for the whole of the UK and the Empire.
Well, 1920, the northern economy was 80% of the economy of the whole island. There was only 20% of the economy, largely a rural economy, in southern Ireland, which became the Republic. And yet today that is all flipped.
It's almost the reverse.
It's
now.
almost the reverse.
The powerhouse is in the south.
The powerhouse is in the south, and the south is all geared very heavily towards new technology, biomedical technology, information communication technology, and a lot of multinational companies have foreign direct investment, whereas our economy here has stagnated over those 100 years.
And looking maybe in more recent times, we've seen fairly dramatic changes in the rise of Sinn Féin recently in the north, the decline of the SDLP, your party, which you once very successfully led, the fall of the conventional Ulster Unionism, the rise of the DUP. But there hasn't been that much change in the two big voting blocs, just a rearrangement of the deck chairs within them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the point was this, that the SDLP and Ulster Unionism in the late 90s decided to make serious sacrifices, and we pulled together the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement, that allowed peace to flow here. And it created peace, it allowed the killing to stop, and Sinn Féin and the DUP were less excited or less enthusiastic about building that agreement. And in due course, though, the communities on each side decided to have an insurance policy. So unionism that initially threw their weight behind a peace process gradually took out an insurance policy by voting for the hardline DUP, and nationalism took out their insurance policy by voting for hardline Sinn Féin. And now today we have those two groups on the top of mountains, if you like, shouting at each other, but doing very little to create the economy that we need here in Northern Ireland.
Which is why this Parliament is in abeyance.
In abeyance for the past 2 years.
However, into this mix, Brexit has arrived.
Yeah.
How is that changing the fundamental attitudes in the north of Ireland?
Brexit has changed everything because Northern Ireland is very vulnerable. In the last, with the involvement of Europe, in the last 30 years, the island economy here, that we had a Northern Ireland and an Irish Republic, and for many years, for about 70 years, they were very, very separate. In the last 30 years, the economies have integrated.
So this is interesting in terms of the political tensions, because the DUP are the dominant party, indeed, apart from one independent, are the only party represented in Westminster from Northern Ireland, because Sinn Féin don't take up those seats. But Brexit has put them in opposition to the majority feeling in Northern Ireland, which voted Remain in the referendum. What are the consequences?
Well, Northern Ireland voted Remain, and the agricultural industry and the food processing industry is the most vulnerable here. And, you know, we have a situation where the Ulster Farmers Union, even though they would be substantially supportive of the DUP, are at loggerheads with the DUP because they are now facing up to the serious damage that Brexit will do to their economic futures. And we're having all sorts of strange situations where people who would be very staunch unionists are now setting up their businesses in the south across the border to ensure that they have access to the European market.
So while many observers, including this one, have noted that for their parliamentary numbers, the DUP have played a rather successful parliamentary game at Westminster, but the deck may be shuffling quite differently back home in Northern Ireland.
The difficulty is that the DUP have overplayed their hand in the UK context, and they've put that priority first. And their main interest is the sovereignty of the United Kingdom. The problem is that's totally at odds with the economic interests of the man in the street and the woman in the street in Northern Ireland. That's the difficulty.
And you think it's economic and social priorities which will prevail at the end of the day?
Yes. The economy always prevails in spite of everything. And if people haven't enough to eat, if people haven't access to education and healthcare, then basically they begin to place the sovereignty of the UK second or third down their list rather than first.
How does the fact that so many young people in Northern Ireland are so pro-Europe, how is that going to play out when you overlay it against the national question?
Young people here, and those that are not so young, maybe people that were young 20 years ago, all were able to access a term or a period in a European university or a European institute of education of some sort. Basically, the young people in their teens now feel that that opportunity has been shut down and shut off them and taken away from them, that they are being deprived, that they are being disadvantaged, that Brexit is threatening their future, not just their economic future, but their potential to fulfil themselves.
But does that, for example, make a youngster from a Protestant community in Northern Ireland look not just to Europe, but to look to Ireland for his future?
Well, people are thinking outside the box, and I can't speak for young unionists or Protestants who maybe in the past would have been robustly in favour of the union, but my sense is that a number of them are beginning to question their own future. And at the end of the day, quite simply, people who would have been very loyal to Westminster in the past and loyal to the UK and loyal to the British government are now finding the bizarre behaviour of the British government around Brexit is deeply disillusioning them.
Now, Alistair, you've spent a lifetime in politics as a constitutional nationalist, somebody trying to achieve a united Ireland through strictly constitutional means. If I were to ask you to answer the $1 billion question, put a time scale on Irish unity, what would your estimation be now?
Well, I think people like me parked our interest in Irish unity, deferred it, let's say. We didn't give up on it, but the Good Friday Agreement in 1998 was about giving and taking, and we made sacrifices, the Irish government made sacrifices, various people made sacrifices to allow space to be created in the middle. In that context, I would have seen the Irish reunification being deferred perhaps to 2035, 2040. I see with Brexit and today's things that timescale has tightened significantly. And I feel that if there's a bad Brexit, if there's not a good deal done with the European Union, then very quickly people will be forced economically to work in the south. I mean, to put it very bluntly, I can't spell it out in very specific details, but I see a lot of staunch unionist DUP supporting businesses setting up subsidiaries in the south to ensure that they have an insurance policy, that they have it both ways.
And what do you think that tells us about the timescale for potential Irish unification?
Well, I think a lot depends on a lot of events out there, and a lot will depend on the Irish government and how they reach out. It's all about reaching out, it's all about persuading, it's all about understanding, it's all about accommodating people and creating the tolerance necessary. The Ireland that will come about in 20 years' time, or perhaps before it, will be a very different Ireland from the Ireland we thought we would create 40 years ago, and certainly the one that people thought 100 years ago that they would create. Every generation has the right to write its own script and to create its own history, and the generation that are now 18 or 20 years of age will be writing the history of this country in 20 years' time.
Well, Alistair MacDonald, I can't put a timescale on the United Ireland, but what I can say, for appearing on the Alex Salmond Show, you're entitled to the Quaich. Now, I don't need to tell an Irishman Quaich is Scots Gaelic for loving cup. Whiskey in the Quaich, only Scotch whiskey. And then round all your close friends, sir.
Well, thank you very much. This is small compensation for the Scots stealing the whiskey from Bushmills. You know,
all these years ago.
We had this recipe for whiskey 400 years ago, and the Scots came and stole it.
Pinched it.
Right. So this compensates a little bit.
Coming up after the break, we speak to some of these young people that Alistair MacDonald was talking about. What is their view on the future of this province? Welcome back. I'm now joined by a group of young people who have been organising a symposium about the future of Northern Ireland and the future of Europe. Now, it's Olivia, Rory, Natalie. Olivia, can I turn to you first? You helped organise this symposium. What was the idea behind the event?
When Rory initially came up with the idea of the event and involved me and others, it was more about the young people in our area and inviting schools in our area to really have their say on the uncertainties around Brexit. But more importantly, I suppose to emphasise the cultural awareness to the politicians that were there, that we're not dealing with, any small issue here. In past times, such a contentious area, and with a large majority of those students who attended the symposium applying to university, some down south, some over in England, some abroad, via the Erasmus programme, for example. The symposium's real aim was to get information and to get a feel from the crowd, if you like, and from young people in general about what their opinion is on Brexit and arguably the damaging effect that it's going to have on not only our community but communities throughout Northern Ireland.
So, Ray, what was the feeling of the symposium?
It was overwhelmingly, the majority, I'd say maybe 95% of people there were in favour of Remain, which is quite telling in itself. In Northern Ireland, there's this perception that a lot of maybe unionists would be in favour of leaving the European Union, whereas we had a lot of maybe unionist Protestant schools there who were actually more inclined or more favourable towards the Union or the European Union.
So that was that a surprise for you, Natalie, that there was such a unity of opinion among the folk gathered at the symposium?
In a way it was surprising, yes, but given the history of Northern Ireland and the fact that we're just healing from 30 years of conflict, I'm not surprised that lots of young people did seem to worry about that perhaps coming back around due to Brexit. I think that a lot of young people were against leaving the European Union because they didn't want those divides to arise again, and therefore we were all united in, well, not all of us, but about 90% of the young people were united in wanting to remain in the European Union.
Olivia, I'm interested, you're 17, 18 years old, looking forward to going to university somewhere for the Erasmus programme or elsewhere. Are you conscious, very conscious, that your lifetime has been spent in an era of comparative peace in this province, where if you'd been 20 years older, you'd have had a totally different experience?
Oh, indeed. Definitely. Northern Ireland years ago was a completely different place to what it is now. And, lucky enough, we as a group of individuals and part of our generation have never had to deal with that kind of level of conflict or, combat, if you like. I think that with the increasing uncertainty of the times in which we live and this idea of no hard border, maybe a hard border, it definitely creates tensions that were perhaps underlying, perhaps hushed before, and definitely brings them to the fore of, a lot of fears in young people's minds of the idea that those divisions that were once there could be recreated, if you like.
Now, Rory, I know from speaking to you, you've got your eyes set on going to Dublin for your university education. When you were looking at that, how encompassing were your horizons? Did you sort of think, well, I might stay here in Northern Ireland, or I might go to Dublin or Scotland or elsewhere in Europe?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. You look here in Northern Ireland, we've no parliament. You look over the UK.
But you've got a parliament building.
Yeah, it's looking pretty empty today. But
couldn't you have your symposium in there?
I'm sure the free bookings are available.
Would it most sense talk for a while, I suspect.
And then, so we've no real representation here. When we look over to the UK Parliament, we look over to the Commons. There's such a lack of confidence. You look at the cabinet, you look at the Prime Minister, and you wonder, what are they doing? Do they really care about maybe us, the young people in Northern Ireland? As a nationalist, for me, I'm not actually being represented over there. The only MPs we have are DUP and Sylvia Herman, and we've the 78 Sinn Féin MPs don't take their seats. So for me, my voice in Westminster, where Brexit is the real issue of Brexit.
That's an interesting point. You've got an empty parliament and a parliament where you're not, your community at least, are not directly representative. This impression that the UK government is giving, whether you're a Remainer or a Brexiteer, very few people would describe it as organised over the last year or two. Does that create a difference in how young people in Northern Ireland regard Westminster, seeing the disarray of Theresa May's government?
Definitely. I'd say that the lack of government organisation in Parliament at the minute is very, very evident. not just within the government but also within the opposition. I don't feel like we have many good options in terms of government in Westminster. For that reason, I believe that a united Ireland is becoming more appealing. I feel like the government down south has it kind of more together than the government in Westminster. I would have previously been a unionist before Brexit, but given all the uncertainty that it brought, I now would be more leaning towards united Ireland.
Because presumably in generations, quite apart from any religious divide, or the impression of London's strength against Dublin weakness in political terms must have been a factor in how people judged whether to be in union with the United Kingdom or a united Ireland. That must have been a factor. What do you think about that, Olivia?
Well, I think that this idea that, was arguably promoted for such a long time that, Westminster government is the best government for everyone and it is sovereign, and speaking as a nationalist, and I've never had that opinion, but I mean, with the involvement of the Irish Parliament now, and you have these amazing figures who are just such inspirational politicians, and I think,
name a few.
Leo Varadkar for a start, obviously Irish politics and the dimension and I suppose the face of Irish politics has significantly changed, and I think that's certainly more appealing for unionist voters here in the north, but more importantly it's appealing on a Brexit basis, because I think the economic fears of what's going to happen here definitely accelerate the desire for united Ireland even among unionists.
And Rory, you think at the end of the day for young people the economics will prevail, because translate economics into opportunity, which obviously is uppermost in all three of your mind. What am I going to do with my life?
Yeah, even just basic travel opportunities. People my age just want to go and explore the world, explore Europe, and I mean those options are being cut down. And again, you talk of the economy. The amount of jobs that maybe the European provided 30, 40, 50 years ago across Europe, and both ways, European citizens coming over to the UK and UK citizens going over to Europe are obviously vital to the economy, but again, those opportunities are being cut.
So Natalie, let's just imagine this building was occupied instead of empty at the present moment. What would your message be to the political leaders of Northern Ireland?
Well, I would tell the political leaders of Northern Ireland that they should put all their divisions aside and try and be cohesive and work together to provide the best future for Northern Ireland, as this is a crucial time in our country's history. And
Rory, let's say the franchise, instead of having to wait till you were 18, 16 in Scotland, but 18 to vote, they limited the franchise, so nobody over 25 was allowed to vote. What do you think then, if it was just the under 25s were voting in Northern Ireland, what then would happen? Do you think the society would change dramatically?
Yeah, obviously younger people have more liberal views. You look at parties like the DUP, they're represented maybe by an older generation. A generation maybe stuck in the past, stuck in the troubles with, some bitterness, hatred. You look at the young people today, and I mean, in our symposium, we saw that, older generations look and they think that young people shouldn't have a voice because they don't know what they're talking about. But we saw that people do, people understand politics and, they want to have a voice and they want to have an opinion.
So Olivia, on that point, when you look at the changes that have been taking place in the Republic, the social changes, the equal marriage legislation, the referendum, the secularisation of Southern Irish society, is that an influence in how people regard Ireland and Northern Ireland and the South?
Well, I think, you definitely get the sense of stasis and paralysis in the north compared to the south. I mean, there's a precedent for change. The repealing of the 8th Amendment, equal marriage. You can see there that there's a demand for change and there's a demand for liberalisation and progress, which to me it's certainly stimulating and quite upsetting when you see the difference a border makes in the sense of progress for society. And I think that certainly in the last few years living here in Northern Ireland, you tend to get this vision of everywhere else progressing and you certainly being stuck in a time of the same.
Can I ask the three of you, elsewhere across the world, school kids have been on strike to save the planet, and you've been organising symposiums. I mean, you can do both, of course, but what's the best thing to do? Do you think it's the symposium or the strike?
I think we have to deal with the current issue and open our eyes in the sense that this is not going to go away. It's not a case of, it's such a worry, and the increasing uncertainty and the anxiety that Brexit brings, it's an issue that needs to be dealt with now, presently. I mean, of course, there's so many important political issues that young people give their attention to every day, but at the end of the day, I think we all feel that this is, a crisis is an appropriate word for the situation that we find ourselves in, and it has to be dealt with appropriately and coherently.
And in a word, is change coming?
I would say open your eyes, and let's hope.
Rory, change coming?
I think so. You look around, you look at young people, and they're well respected. They're tuned in. So yeah.
And in 5 years' time, Natalie, if your counterparts hold another symposium, will they be looking at a totally different perspective?
Hopefully that there is a new perspective within Northern Ireland. And I'd just like to say that young people aren't the problem, young people are the solution to this crisis. So.
In that case, Natalie, Rory, Olivia, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
A little over a decade ago, I addressed the Assembly people in that building behind us, in the Senate part of the building, at the invitation of the Reverend Ian Paisley as First Minister of Northern Ireland and his Deputy Martin McGuinness. And at that time, the Democratic Unionist Party and Sinn Féin were just achieving dominance over their sections of the political communities of Northern Ireland, and they remain dominant to this day. So when we talk about Northern Ireland, I interview DUP MPs from the Green outside the House of Commons campaigning for Brexit, or we interview Sinn Féin from Dublin campaigning for a united Ireland. In these programmes, we're looking at what's happening below the surface in Northern Irish politics, at the very substantial implications that Brexit is bringing to various parts of the community, how business people are looking at the future, how people are looking at the border issue, where the farmers of Northern Ireland, traditionally the unionist bulwark, are still thinking in that direction given the threat to their livelihoods. And above all, we've spoken to some of the young people. And when we speak and engage with them, then I've got the very distinct impression that if they were in that assembly in a few years' time, then their attitude, their perceptions and their vision of the future of this province would be entirely different from what I saw 10 years ago. I think better, but certainly different. So from Tasmania, myself and all at the show here in Belfast, it's goodbye for now.